All right, pastors, leaders, you feel like the Lord has asked you to go in this direction of preaching or speaking to your team or your church about worship, maybe your youth ministry. Here's the 3 points that I used in this last sermon about worship. It's from Genesis, the Abraham and Isaac story. So let's get into it. Ooh. This last Wednesday, I prepared to preach a message on the aspect of worship, but ironically, worship went long and we felt like the Lord was moving in a different direction. But I want to share kind of like the perspective that I had for this sermon on worship, Genesis 22. The perspective I was going to take was that there is a correlation between faith in our worship, faith and worship. And as Abraham is walking with God, he hears from God. Abraham says, "Here I am." He says, "Hey, I want you to sacrifice your son." And so I'm going to give you the 3 points so that you can take it, digest, throw it away, think about it. Maybe it add to your sermon. Maybe it'll be the points that you use. I said, number 1, Abraham's faith was immediate. Abraham decided that he was going to do what God asked him to do. And so in our worship, we have to decide that we were going to respond to God, right? And the reason I correlate this worship and Abraham's life is because this is the first instance, to my knowledge, in Scripture where we see worship being mentioned. And so this definition of the worship in this portion of Scripture is to depress, to bow down. And so my thought would be, hey, for us to be able to worship, and the true meaning of worship is not only sacrifice, but to us become less and him become greater. So Abraham's faith worship was immediate. Number 2, Abraham's faith was intentional. So we go back to the time where his wife could not have a kid, and God raised up a dead womb in Sarah. And so I bring the correlation that Abraham wasn't just walking in a blind faith. He had already ascertained and had the perspective, if God can raise up a dead womb in my wife, he can raise up a dead boy in my son Isaac, even if I do have to sacrifice him. And so he began to recount. He began to think through. He began to be intentional with his worship and with his faith. It wasn't just a blind faith. It was a researched, a thought through faith, a faith that had perspective, that had the ability to see past just what normal humanity would deem as foolish. And so Abraham's faith was immediate, it was intentional, and then God intervened. We know that the story goes, there was a ram caught in the thicket. We don't know if Abraham was on one side and the ram was going up at the other. We don't know if the ram was caught before Abraham was aware of that ram, but he had already been on the mountain. And then right before he is going to sacrifice his son, God brings to attention that there is a ram caught in the bush. This is and this is where I kind of drive the point. This is the most quiet ram in the world. Most people would have a sense of there is an animal near me, especially if it's caught in something. And so really delve into is that even though God had provision planned, even though God had provision prepared for Abraham, Abraham did not see that provision until he was actually going to take that step in sacrifice. I relate that to our worship and to our faith. The things that God has called you to do, he's going to provide for it, but it might not be before you do it. It might be during that actual action or that step of faith. And so those are the 3 points that I had. Take it, leave it, do whatever you want with it. Hopefully it helps you, youth pastors, campus pastors, lead pastors. I'll continue to do more content like this, but God bless you. We'll see you soon. Let's go.